Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session today on the 8 worldly winds, dealing with the highs and lows. Now, you see, life has its ups and downs, its highs and lows, and I'm sure we've all experienced getting pushed and pulled in all sorts of directions before. So what are the 8 worldly winds? And how can we keep grounded amidst the wind and not get blown away like a piece of dust? So today we are honoured to have Matthew Orsborn speaking with us. Matt is a Dharma teacher and scholar of Buddhist studies. Originally from New Zealand, after many years of interest in Buddhism, he joined the Foyin monastic order in 2000. He later continued his master and PhD studies at the University of Hong Kong, and since graduation, he taught Buddhist studies at Foyin University in Taiwan, Mahayana University in Thailand, National Taiwan University, and is currently teaching at Oxford University in the UK. In addition to teaching the history, texts, and teachings of Indian Buddhism, contemporary Chinese Buddhism, and meditation, he also translates classical Buddhist scriptures and modern teachings from Sanskrit, Pali, and Chinese sources, and has traveled and taught internationally to lead Buddhist studies programs and meditation retreats. Wow. So we will start with a guided meditation and talk from Matt, and then we'll hand it over to Tina, who will be facilitating the Q&A sessions, Q&A discussions as per usual. So without further ado, over to you, Matt.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much, Elise. And thank you to, of course, Tina and everyone at the Meta Centre for the invitation and the opportunity to share with you all today. So we'll just do like a quite short little opening meditation here. I'm looking at this as a kind of just finished work for most of you, brains all full of that kind of work stuff. And now we want to calm the mind, focus ourselves on some Dharma practice. And so we're just going to do something really simple. I think we'll just do some quiet sitting, some breath meditation, just for a few minutes. So wherever you may be, if you can sit comfortably, I have to sit comfortably myself here too. Make sure, of course, that your posture is good, as it should be. If you're sitting on a chair, which I think a lot of you are, try to make sure that your knees are lower than your hips, because that helps to get your pelvis rolled forward and your lower back up straight. So you can try to sit up as straight as you can. Don't force it though. Don't be like, we're not doing some kind of like overly stressed to try to show off our meditation posture. Feet flat on the floor if you can, if that is feasible wherever you may be. You can rest your hands maybe on your thighs or on your knees, or you can just sit them in your lap, either or is fine. Now, as for your upper body, so as I said, you're sitting up straight. You ideally want to have kind of your chest open and full. So just check where your shoulders are at first. We can often, if we have rather sedentary lifestyles, have our shoulders a little slumped forward. So you might want to sit up straight, your shoulders a bit more open, your head and neck up straight. So I'm going to sit up straight. I need to adjust my camera here a bit. Up straight. And you want to have your head, like your face, directly facing forward, but your lower jaw, your chin is sort of drawn back in, as it were. And that keeps your neck up straight there. And the position of your neck is really important. That affects the base of your skull. And that has a definite effect upon your state of mind as well. Your mouth gently closed, the tip of the tongue touching the palate of the mouth behind the top front teeth. And your eyes, this is a bit of a matter of preference. If you are used to having your eyes open, then lower your gaze. Now, this might be a bit tricky because we're like on the screen here, and rather than being distracted by seeing what's on the screen, it might work a little bit better to close your eyes and just leave those distractions. If you've got glasses, I see Mike's taking off his glasses, rubbing his eyes, too many hours in front of the PC, huh, Mike? I'm going to leave mine on because I still need to be able to make sure that I can control this the Zoom platform here. So once you're sitting up straight, now by going through and just checking our meditation posture, we're already doing like a really simple mindfulness of the body technique. And now we're going to move on from being aware of the entirety of our body to our breath. So just take a nice deep full breath in, drawing in through your nostrils, and feel your body move and expand, and your body will move and expand with it. Don't be stiff. And then breathing all the way out. Again, through your nostrils. Once again, breathing all the way in, nice deep full breath. And all the way out. And you will feel that movement, particularly in your upper chest, around your shoulders, maybe in your abdomen with the breath. Again, a nice deep full breath in. And all the way out. Now you might want to, after doing a few deep full breaths, just make some micro adjustments to your posture. That enables your posture to more easily facilitate a natural, easy and relaxing breath. And we're just going to do mindfulness of the breath. We won't do counting, but as you breathe in, you may just mentally say to yourself, mindfully breathing in. And as you breathe out, just mindfully say to yourself, mindfully breathing out. So mindfully breathing in on the inhalation and mindfully breathing out on the exhalation. As you're doing this, very likely other thoughts will come to mind. Maybe there will be sounds outside. Maybe there will be some sensations in the body, maybe an itch or something else. Just note it. Okay, that's a sound. That's a sensation in my body. But return your mindful awareness back to your breath. Mindfully breathing in and mindfully breathing out. If your mind wanders, either externally, to sounds perhaps, or internally, to thoughts or sensations in the body, that's okay. It's going to happen. But just return your awareness back to your breath. Mindfully breathing in and mindfully breathing out. For your last inhalation, take a nice full deep breath in, feeling your upper torso expand as the air is drawn in. And once you're full, take a nice long deep breath out. Bring your awareness from the breath back into the entirety of your body as you sit. You can just gently rock your upper body left and right, stretching the side of your body, forward and back. Don't hit your computer monitor. Stretch your neck and head, forward and back, side to side. Roll your shoulders gently. Move your hands and fingers, wriggle your toes, move your legs a little, as much as your posture allows. If you need to, you can join your palms together and just gently rub them for a little warmth. Put your palms over your eyes. Just gently massage around the eyeball area, around the skull. There's many vital points in that area. The rest of the face, the head, your neck, shoulders, down your arms, chest, abdomen, your back. Just move around naturally. Hopefully that has calmed your post-working day mind a little, and brought a little bit of relaxation also to the body. And hopefully it will mean that you can give more attention to our talk today, perhaps, but who knows. Okay, so to the talky bit. Okay, now, because we are on Zoom, which is of course the modern standard for what we do these days, can I ask one of the hosts to let me share the screen or to give me hosting privileges, please?
Yes, do that now.
I was thinking about, should I do a PowerPoint? Should I not? You know, in the teaching profession, I've kind of become ubiquitous to use PowerPoints. I don't like them, a bit too glossy, but it's a bit of a point. And otherwise you're just looking at this face for like an hour or more. So I thought, okay, let's do something a bit more interesting. Hopefully this is coming through. I'm going to now share this, but I would like to ask, are you now seeing the projected screen or are you seeing my working PowerPoint app?
We're seeing PowerPoint and we can see you on the side as well.
Okay, that's great. So today, here we are to talk about the 8 worldly winds. And I'm just going to jump straight into it. And I'm going to begin in a very classic Chinese Buddhist way by reciting poetry in Chinese. 七手田中天，好光照大千，八风吹不动，宛作紫金莲. Which means, I prostrate to the Lord of Lords, radiant light illuminating the entire world. Unmoved by the 8 worldly winds, I sit on a lotus of burnished gold. Sounds so dramatic, doesn't it? Such a beautiful scene. Where does this come from? Some of you may know this scene, and this poem comes from a very famous Chan story between 2 classic individuals who should really probably like have their own reality TV show because they're that interesting. The figure you see on the left is Chan Master Foyin, who is the abbot of Jinshan Gold Mountain Monastery in China. It's not far from Nanjing and kind of halfway between Nanjing and Shanghai. That's probably what you see on the top left of the picture. And the figure on the right is a scholar whose name is technically Su Shi, but he's usually known as Dongpo. He was a scholar, a layman, as you can see, but he wasn't just like a poet and a literati. He was also the kind of like the governor of Yangzhou. And Yangzhou, it sits like directly opposite, on the opposite side of the Yangtze River from Jinshan, from Gold Mountain Monastery. I lived for a while at the monastery there. The monastery is called Damingsi. And right next to Damingsi, and it's on the present day monastery grounds, is Dongpo's old office. And it used to be that from his office, because it's kind of like on a hill at the back of Yangzhou city, you can look out across the whole Yangtze River and you could see the stupa there, the pagoda at Gold Mountain Monastery. You can't now, it's just, the air is just too thick with like kind of icky stuff. But they used to, so these two figures, like they lived on opposite sides of the river. One day, Dongpo was meditating, maybe just as we were before, and in his meditative state, he had maybe some kind of interesting experience, and he came out, he was very inspired. And as a government official with obviously too much time on his hands, because he can be sitting around meditating and writing poetry, he wrote a poem, and he wrote that poem that I just recited to you about, this sort of radiant light and in awe of the Buddha, and in the face of these 8 worldly winds, he is unmoved in the same way in which the Buddha, a Buddha statue like sits on this sort of like lotus flower and is unmoved. So he wrote down the poem, and he called over one of his shultong, his kind of like, nowadays that'd be like a TA, a teaching assistant. So these youngsters that run around the office, and they're like the interns that go and get coffee and stuff like that. So he wrote down the poem, put it in an envelope, gave it to this like little intern guy, said, go across the river and send this to Chan Master Foyin. So he gets in the boat, rows across the river, goes up to the monastery, goes all the way through, and finally gets to the abbot's office. Very reverently like passes over his teacher's poetry. Chan Master Foyin reads the poem, takes out his pen, and writes like 2 characters at the bottom of the poem, folds it back up, gives it back to the intern, and says, take it back. So the intern, his poor rowing across the Yangtze is no mean feat, rows back all the way over, climbs through the rest of like Yangzhou city, up the mountain to the back of Daming Temple, and presents it back to his teacher, his boss, Governor Dongpo, who opens it up. And so he reads his own poem, which is still there, and at the bottom are written 2 characters in Chinese, Fang Pi. Fang Pi literally means fart, like fart, like to pass wind. So he wrote this poem expressing his like inspired experience of this meditative state and awe of the Buddha and all this. And this Chan master writes fart at the bottom of his poetry. As you can imagine, he was not particularly impressed by this, and he was really incensed, to be honest. So he took it, ran down the mountain himself, jumped in the boat himself, rowed across the river himself, and you can see the boat right there in the bottom kind of right corner. And when he got to the other side, actually the Chan master Foyin was like waiting for him at the dock. He says, Master, I was meditating and I had a wonderful meditative experience. Shows my, in it, I wrote a poem. Afterwards, I wrote a poem showing my respect to the Buddha, and the gloriousness of the Dharma teaching. He's like this literati. I'm sure he said it in a much more like flowery and fancy sounding way than I'm saying it now. And you deigned to write fart at the bottom of my poem. And Chan Master Foyin says, you wrote that you are unmoved in the 8 worldly winds, but a simple fart has blown you all the way across the river. And you can imagine Dongpo, just like, oh, heck. He's writing this poem about how he's unmoved, and he was moved, like in a really bad way. Red-faced, probably cursing, and sort of it's a bit like Scooby-Doo, you know, "Oh, you pesky kids caught me again." You know, he's going like, "You win this time, Chan Master." Gets back in his boat, so you know, rows home and probably fumed in his office for the rest of the day. I love this story. It's a great story. I've not only mentioned this story many times myself. I used to often have to translate this story a lot when I was in Taiwan, isn't it? When I'm still in Taiwan right now. So what are these 8 worldly winds? Well, let me just talk a little bit about the story here. So these 8 worldly winds are, you know, it's a metaphor, obviously, for things that strike us and clash into us in our daily lives. We could maybe expand the metaphor a little bit further. We could maybe say the river is maybe samsara, you know, which literally means like a flowing, swirling river. Maybe Chan Master Foyin on the other shore represents kind of this awakened state. And we also know that in this whole metaphor of crossing over samsara, the ocean of suffering, the other shore, dry land, is of course another metaphor for nirvana, liberation. So there's a lot. We can read this story in a very metaphoric way. And of course, that's a very classic sort of Chan way of telling such stories. So what are these 8 worldly winds that Dongpo was supposedly unmoved by? We have loss and gain. We have praise and blame. We have infamy and fame. And we have pleasure and pain. As you can see, I've tried to make it kind of a bit catchy with a bit of rhyme there, but it's a fairly accurate translation. Okay, so don't worry. Loss and gain, 2 contrasting opposites, right? We lose things, but we also gain things. Praise and blame. Sometimes we receive praise from others, but sometimes we also receive like the opposite. Maybe blame isn't quite the right word, but it rhymes. But, you know, sometimes we're like scolded for things, saying we did something badly. We have infamy and fame. Sometimes we do things really great. People know about us and we become a little bit famous, you know, like, you know, I got 50 likes on my Facebook page. I'm famous. I'm going viral. And then sometimes we're like infamous, which kind of infamous is a bit like being famous because people do know about you. You have to be well known to be infamous, but it's like for all the wrong reasons, right? So they're kind of opposites, but they share like a definite commonality. And of course, pleasure and pain, 2 contrasting ends of this kind of experiential, affective side of life that's just like going on all the time. Now, when we talk about these, I've put specifically pleasure and pain at the end because I'm going to talk about those as kind of a catch-all for a greater range of experience. Traditionally, these 8 aren't given in this order, but it doesn't really make that much difference, I don't think. So let's just talk a little bit about each of these. Again, a few little classic stories. The first one about loss and gain. The classic story from the Chinese side is Saiong Shima. So the old man who lost his horse. So you may know this story, but if you don't, and even if you do, I'm going to tell it again. So the story goes, is this old man, and he lived out like in the borderlands, so like kind of out in the hinterlands, a long way from the city, where resources are pretty scarce. And he had a horse, just one horse. I know the picture, there's many horses, we'll get to that. He had one horse, it's kind of like his prized horse. He needs it, right, to run his farm. And one day the horse like disappeared and like ran off. And his neighbors were sort of like, oh, no, you lost your horse. Oh man, that's like so terrible. It's so bad. But this old guy, this old man was quite philosophical about it. And he said, necessarily a bad thing. Maybe it's a good thing. And they were kind of like what? How can that be a good thing? And sure enough, like a couple of days later, his horse returned, but not alone. His horse returned with, usually the story says another horse, so 2 horses. In this story, we've got 5 horses. So maybe his horse came back with a whole bunch of other horses. And voila, he's gone from being just a regular poor farmer to now a man with multiple horses. Hey, and the neighbors came out and they're like, woohoo, all right, you know, you got all the horses. Yeah, you got so many horses. This is amazing. You should celebrate. was like, maybe, might not be a good thing, I'm like, what do you mean it's not a good thing? Like 5 horses. You've like quadrupled your investment. But he was philosophical. So one of the horses that came back was a really nice thoroughbred. And the old guy's son loved to, they're all tame horses in the story. Makes the storytelling easier. And his son used to love riding this like super fast horse that came back. And again, the neighbors were impressed. Oh, wow, super fast horse. And the son was racing all around the place and stuff. Until one day, his son fell off the horse. And falling off a horse is no small thing. Unlike in Hollywood, there's a really good chance you're going to break something. And he broke his leg. Pretty nasty. He broke his leg. And again, the neighbors came out. Of course, the old guy went over, well, got to look after his son and give him medical treatment. And all the neighbors were like, oh, that's terrible. Your son's broken his leg. He can't work the fields. Oh, what are you going to do in winter? And the old guy again was like, well, who knows? Maybe it's a good thing. I'm like, what is a good thing? Your son broke his leg. I don't know what his son thought about that. Like, what do you mean, Dad? What do you mean it's a good thing? Hey, come on. But he was still philosophical. And so while his son was probably like strapped up in some kind of like, medieval cast or some pieces of wood strapped to the side of his leg or something, walking around on crutches, some officials from the city were passing through the area, and they were military men. And they were saying, the emperor is starting a war against some people you've never heard of, who are absolutely no threat to you, but they've started a war nonetheless, and we need young military men. All the young men got to join the army. Do you have a son? He says, I've got a son. And bring him out. He said, well, and hobbles out on his crutches. Yeah, we can't take this guy. Yeah, stay at home. We can't use you for the army. And so they went away. And the neighbors came out like, oh, again, it turned out to be a good thing. Okay, now you can take the story and you can like keep on running with it, and you can probably add more episodes to it. But the gist of the story is this old guy kind of goes from gain to loss. He loses a horse, he gains more horses, but that gain then leads to like a loss, his son being unable to work, but that kind of results in a gain that his son didn't get sent off to some war to get possibly slaughtered or injured or something like that. Now, this story, it's not a Buddhist story. It's a classic Chinese story. It comes from, some people might say it's a Taoist story, but let's just say it's just a classical Chinese story to highlight this philosophical old grandpa that in the face of gain and loss, he manages to keep this kind of equanimous mind. But we can kind of think about the neighbors as like the regular people, like lose the horse and like, oh, they're down, it's so bad. And then they get extra horses and they're all like elated, and they're kind of bouncing backwards and forwards between like the gain is good and the loss is bad, and so on and so forth. So that's an interesting story. And we're going to come back to this story later, but we still need to continue with the other stories. The second story is about a Japanese Zen master by the name of Hakuin. In Chinese is Foyin. So, all the usual things about Zen masters and, they're and they've got these great mastery of things. And they always maintain this sort of equanimous mind that in the face of all these things that happen, they manage to keep very chill. And so one of the classic stories to illustrate this fact about the Zen master Hakuin is, well, let's take a step back before we get into the juice of the story. So obviously he's like a Zen master. He's the abbot of his monastery. So within this sort of the village and the local area, of course, he's very well known. He's sort of famous, but he's also praised for his virtue. Now, it so happened that there was a young lady who lived in this village who became pregnant and gave birth to a little baby, obviously. And the parents were furious because she was an unmarried woman. Oh no, unmarried woman having babies. Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm joking because I'm kind of being facetious in my joking, but in those times it did happen, and woe betide those poor young ladies to whom that happened to, because they were in a very, 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 very difficult social situation. So the parents were pushing her away. Who's the father? Who's the father? And she pointed to Zen Master Hakuin and said, he's the father. And you can just imagine like everyone's like jaws just like dropping, like, oh my Buddha. And when she did this, and the parents like confronted him, said, are you the father of this child? He reportedly said, or maybe they said, you are the father of this child. And apparently he just said, is that so? He didn't say, yo, that's me, or no way, Jose. He said, is that so? And I'm like, really? Okay. And so they took the baby from this young lady and they gave it to Zen Master Hakuin to raise. And to be honest, like giving a little baby to a monastery to raise is that's okay. There are much better places, you can raise a little kid. Anyway, for the sake of the story, this is what happened. I don't know what happened to the poor girl. She probably got like shipped off to her relatives for a long visit. Probably what happened. But when they gave over the child and said, this is your baby, and Zen Master was just like, oh, is that so? Really? Okay. Many years passed, and this young lady probably came back from her long visit to her relatives, a long way away, and she finally fessed up and said that the father of the baby was, and there's like all these different versions of the story. They say it's the baker's son or the butcher's son or something. But the main point is it wasn't the Zen master. And so the parents who originally, like furious with Zen Master Hakuin and scolded him, oh, you're a monk and how could you do such evil things and getting a girl pregnant? And, you can imagine what would have happened. I mean, I said she, gave the baby to be raised in the monastery. It probably wasn't. It was probably more like he was half kicked out of the monastery, probably has to go live under a bridge somewhere, live in some little shack, still raise the baby. Just raise the baby. And so when the young lady fessed up and said who the father was, they probably found that the real father and probably chewed him out instead. But they went back to the Zen master. And that would have been a bit of an awkward moment, wouldn't it? And the Zen master, well, a little update. Apparently, you're not the father after all. And Zen master's like, oh, really? Is that so? And they took the child back, and I don't know, did they give it back to the daughter or did they give it to the real father to raise? The story does not relate. But then they praised him even more, that this virtuous Zen monk who was innocent, not only was he innocent, but when he was accused of this thing that he hadn't done and was given a baby to raise and basically sort of had to drop probably everything to like raise this baby for a few years, did so without any complaint. So they thought of not only virtuous, but oh, he's so kind and he didn't blame the girl and he's looked after the child. And, so he went from praise to blame to praise again. And throughout all this, he managed to keep this, oh, is that so? Oh, really? Is that so? And we can think like maybe if that was us, how would we'd respond to that? Oh, I'll see you in court. Nowadays, of course, it would just be like, paternity test, right? A DNA test and that kind of thing. But before this kind of, sorted out pretty quickly. But before that, you can imagine like, oh man, all hell would be breaking loose and defending ourselves and our honor. And it would just be a mess. So we've gone through many Asian figures. So we need the obligatory white blonde girl. Okay, no, actually I'm not. I'm kind of joking with you. So the last kind of pair is pleasure and pain. And when I Googled up pleasure and pain, this is actually one of the pictures that came up. Okay, I didn't like deliberately find it. And it was actually one of the best pictures. So we've kind of got like, what do we call it? Like neutral face in the middle here, right? Like, I'm going to try to use, neutral face in the middle here. And then we've got screaming. I don't know, is that pain or is it like anger or is it just a really big yawn? I don't know. Let's read it as pain and pleasure, kind of happy face. Okay, there we go. Clear all those. Okay, so pleasure and pain. Now, why am I going to talk about pleasure and pain as a sort of a catch-all for many of these? Usually, so let's think back to our old man loses the horse. When he loses the horse, loss is kind of associated with pain, right? We like to have stuff. So we lose something and it's painful. And when he gets more horses, of course, that's pleasure. That's a good thing, happy thing, right? You get the idea? So usually we associate gain of good stuff with happiness, loss of our possessions and whatever with pain. If we think about what was the other pair that we had? Praise and blame. Usually praise, you get very happy. Yes, who's a good boy? I'm a good boy. Who's a bad boy? I'm a bad boy. Praise, pleasure, happiness. Blame, pain, right? It's kind of pretty obvious, right? And of course, the other two, fame and infamy. Now, I mean, you might argue some people don't want fame. Yeah, I mean, it's true. So we're just talking about in general terms here. Usually people want to be famous. Just look at, influencer culture. It's like insane, absolutely insane. Fame, we become happy. Infamy, when people think we're bad, it's painful. So I want to talk about the pleasure and pain and like, where do these fit into it within like a Buddhist take? Let's take a big technical shift here. And instead of like just chatting some funky little neat stories and PowerPoint slides, we're going to shift into something far more technical. Hello, PowerPoint. Oh, my PowerPoint's not playing along. Come on. Okay, here we go. We're going to talk about mental process from a Buddhist perspective. Time. So process takes place in time. So think of this as taking place in time. We have, it's like pretty much textbook, Buddhist theory of mind, accepted by most schools. I've got a little bit of a kind of a yogacara angle on it, but don't worry about that. We have sense organs, we have sense objects, right? So you've got eyes, you've got ears, you've got nose, you've got tongue, you've also got a mind. These are our sense organs, and we have various objects, the things we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, and the things that we think about. These are the objects of the senses. When we have these, we have cognition. Usually this gets translated as consciousness. I prefer the word cognition. So when you see something, you might be looking at the screen now. You might be looking at this very thing on your monitor, on your phone or something. That is a visual cognition. You're hearing my voice, and that is an auditory, right? A sound cognition. You're getting like this constant stream of all these coming at you all the time, day in, day out. We are cognizing beings. We are conscious beings. Now, of course, it doesn't just end there. When we see things, hear things, smell, etc., etc. There's more. There's more. Due to the fact that we have various, I'm calling these like underlying mental seed potentials. We can just think of these as potentialities in the mind. We are not just a blank slate, right? Our minds are not blank slates. And I don't just mean as adults, they're not blank slates. Even when we are babies, our minds are not the famous tabula rasa. There's all sorts of stuff in there. And they've done good studies on this actually to show that like babies are not this like white sheet of paper, clean that we put in. There's like all sorts of stuff going on in babies' minds. All sorts of crazy stuff. We have sensations. Now, this is the first key bit that is associated with this idea of pleasure and pain. Depending on what we cognize with our senses, we might get sensations that are pleasant or painful. And due to those sensations of pleasure and pain, we might respond with these emotions of like desire and aversion, right? So basically, pleasure comes along. What's the response? Desire. I want it. It's cake. It's good. I want more, right? Pain. I stub my toe on a large rock and it hurts and I want to destroy the rock. Like that's really going to help. But aversion to something, right? You get praised and like, keep it coming. You get blamed, shut up, right? Desire and aversion. We also have perceptions as well. We don't just have sensations, we also have perceptions. So these are like thoughts and ideas associated with that thing. So you eat the ice cream and you might go, chocolate ice cream, it's delicious. But we might have some other perceptions going on here as well. And many of these other perceptions are associated with this idea of me, mine, and I. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a minute. You know, you're eating the chocolate ice cream and you might be thinking, chocolate ice cream, it's my favorite, right? You go and buy an ice cream and you're walking out the door and you're not careful and somebody's walking past with their golden Labrador who suddenly leaps 5 feet into the air, snatches your entire chocolate ice cream out of your hand and swallows it in one bite. And you think, hey, dog, that was my ice cream. So we associate things with different ideas. And many of these ideas are ideas about how do those things relate to me, right? Either me, myself, and I, or maybe my things, my possessions, that's mine, right? Me and mine. Me and I is just kind of like me, myself, and mine is something that's not me, myself, but it's something associated with me, something that belongs to me, the idea that I have like some kind of power or rights over this idea. Now, from both our responses to the sensations and these perceptions, we have different intentions or different, I'm just going to say karma. Technically, it's sanskara in Pali. But basically, this is karma. This is the, I also like to translate this as emotion and think of that word emotion, like motion means movement and emotion is something which makes us move, right? Like to emote, something that makes us move. So, you know, that desire and that, you know, that pleasant feeling, chocolate ice cream, desire towards, that makes us move, makes us do things with respect to that object, whether it's desire toward or aversion away. And all of these emotions, now I've kind of drawn it a bit like this because I want to say that, like, strictly speaking, these things here, change color. Where's color? Change color. These things here are actually, the desires and aversions are actually already forms of karma. But I just want to draw it here to kind of show that that comes directly from the sensation, not from the perception. And also, actually, these notions of constructing or conceiving of things in self-centered terms are also forms of intentional karma, forms of samskara. And all of these, when we have them, build up tendencies within our mind, and they kind of then underlay future potentials, right? So the more you associate with something over and over and over and over again, the more you start to strengthen that idea, for example, that it's my favorite. I eat something new once, it tastes good. I eat it again, I eat it for the 1000th time. Now it's become my favorite, not just something that tastes good. And likewise, possessions and whatever. And so this builds up this underlying potential so that in the future, when we have further cognitions, we're even more likely to respond in the same ways. Oh, close the annotation button. Hello. Initially, these desires and aversions and these ideas about me, mine, and I are internal. They are going on in the mind, mental karma, shall we say, but they very quickly become physical and verbal actions. And these in turn have like feedback towards our sense organs, right? So, you know, you look at something, you're walking down the road, you walk past a shop that's got some, I don't know, some item of clothing that looks good. You look at it, you get a pleasant feeling. You might take a few more steps and stop and turn your head back around and have another look at it, right? So what you're doing there is you're having this like pleasant experience of it and whatever, and then you've got this intention to have a physical action, which is to turn your head, which reorients your sense organs so that you can see the object again, so you can have another cognition and get another dose of that pleasant feeling, right? Strengthen it, get more of that pleasant feeling. And also, not just that, but we also might have physical and verbal actions that move the object. You go in and you pick up the object from the rack and you're looking at it. You're again entering into some like relationship with it, some interaction with it to further strengthen these like cognitions and these pleasant feelings. And we can also say the same is true when it comes to painful sensations. Now, so far, we've kind of mainly been talking about these ideas as if they are sort of like, you know, the desire and aversion just comes from the sensation, and the notions of perception also just lead to the sense of me, mine, and I. But actually, these two interact with one another. They're also mutually supportive. In Buddhist technical terms, sometimes, I mean, there's many different ways of talking about like afflictions, but one of the classic ways is one of many classic ways of analyzing the afflictions is a twofold one. One is this one, which are kind of like emotional ones, and one which they usually call it like either views or maybe intellectual ones. But don't think of these two as like entirely distinct from one another. They mutually support one another too. Oh, you have to clear those annotations, don't you? Otherwise, we've got two weird glowing red eyeballs. Okay. So let's talk about how that works in this sort of self-centered universe. So we're going to start with this dude. Hey, stop. Start with this dude. I'm kind of a big deal, right? That's kind of usually how we think of ourselves. Now, don't think this only applies to people that think they are a big deal. It applies to everyone. This is just a stereotype. When we have notions, for example, such as my reputation, notions such as my status, notions such as my benefit, notions such as my advantage, we can quickly see how these can relate back to notions such as gain and loss, right? Praise and blame, fame and infamy. So what happens in this process of associating pleasant feelings with self things? So let's imagine this big deal kind of guy. I don't know. Does he look like some kind of, what can we imagine? Maybe he's I don't know, what's this guy's job? He's an influencer. He's an online influencer. Okay. So his deal is about, of course, he's so dashingly handsome with that cool 1970s mustache and that big hair. I'm really just jealous. That he started off by making lots of very handsome and attractive photos of himself, posting them all over Twitter and whatever, attracting a follower, and then saying all sorts of outrageous things to build up a following. And then he monetizes it, and he makes a living off doing this. So first of all, let's just talk about what he looks like. So there's this appearance that he has. Maybe it's considered this attractive appearance. So he gets praise for this, right? He gets reinforcement, the idea that his looks, what he looks like is a good thing. He gets praise for it. So this further strengthens his idea that this is him. I am my looks, shall we say. Maybe within this, he compares himself to other influencers and finds his nose is too big or something. And so he gets criticism for having a big nose. So he doesn't like that. That's painful. But instead of saying, nope, that's my nose. That's my nose. That's just my nose. That's what I was born with. He doesn't. It's a painful thing. He receives criticism for it. He doesn't like it. He doesn't want this nose. He opts for plastic surgery. And he changes his nose to a pleasant nose. Got a catalogue of noses at the plastic surgeon's clinic, and he picks out the nose that works best for him. They go and they do the surgery. He's come out with a new nose. And now this is my nose. So you can see here, look, the things that lead to pleasure are the things that he builds up his sense of self about. This is my attractive hair and my big mustache. But this nose, no, that's not me, because it's ugly and it's bad. So I reject that and try to substitute it for something else. The things that provide us with pleasure are also then the things that we construct within our world and our views of self and mind. And the things that are painful to us are the things that we reject as being not self. Right now, we don't just do this with our appearance, we do it for other things as well, right? Reputation, we can get all sorts of benefits out of that and status and the like. So we think that's a good thing. And when it gets ruined, it's not just that this sort of people's opinion has changed, but something that's very integral to who I am, right? This is my status. This is about me. Likewise, benefits that we receive, advantages that we receive, all these things, we take them as who we are. So this very sense of like this sort of self-centered universe, looking at all these things as being somehow integral to who I am. These things, they're subject to change. They're all sorts of different conditions can happen and alter them and influence them. Reputation, status, and the like, for example, they're not created by ourselves. These are also, shall we say, given to us by others. They're not entirely under our control, and they can change at the drop of a hat. Likewise, benefits we receive, advantages we receive to that, with those things are also subject to change. But because we build up this sense of self, this very strong sense of self, we paint it in ways that we like. And the things that we don't like about ourselves, we try to like paint out of the picture, right? You do a bad thing, oh, I heard you did something really stupid the other night. Oh no, that wasn't me. But if we hear like, oh, I heard you did a wonderful job. Well, yes, I did, didn't I? So I hope you can see from this kind of rather silly, funny example, the way in which the emotional side of pleasure and pain also works with this view of self that we have. And this constructed self-centered universe is also then a way of we're setting ourselves up for problems. So let's get back to our fun story here of Chan Master Foyin and Dongpo. So the next time you do something good, and you're all very proud of yourself, like you had a wonderful meditation and you want to boast to your friends about it. No, you people probably don't do that. I hope you don't. Sometimes some people do. It's quite nauseating. And you want to write, I prostrate to the Lord of Lords, radiant light illuminating the entire world. Unmoved by the 8 worldly winds, I sit on a lotus of burnished gold. And somebody comes along and says, fart. What you going to do? Are you going to get farted all the way across the river? Or are you going to take another approach and say, thank you very much for reminding me of my big fat ego, the same big fat ego that my Dharma practice is supposed to be dealing with. You're welcome. When we face the 8 worldly winds, when we get the difficult ones, when we get the criticism, when we get the loss, when we get the pain, when we get the infamy, take it as part of your practice, as a reminder, yeah, why does this hurt? Because I've constructed my worldview in a way that I'm attached to these things. So thank you, O universe, for providing me with a little reminder, or thank you, whoever it is that provides you with this little reminder, that I've still got a lot to work on. And when we receive the positive side as well, do your best to also take it as a reminder of things that like, yeah, okay, maybe I'm receiving these good things, but they can change, just like the old man who lost the horse. Keep those things in mind. And if you can do that, I think you'll find that the 8 worldly winds, you too can actually sit on your lotus of burnished gold. Sounds such a nice image, isn't it? And be unmoved in the face of the 8 worldly winds. Okay, that's enough PowerPointing from me. Hopefully we've got some time to, I don't know, have a conversation about it. So, I don't know, how do we do this? Let's just talk. Share with me, people. Put up your hand. Oh, I think who's going to be our moderator? Okay, Tina, I'll just shut up now.
Not at all. That was so interesting. And in fact, some very wise words that have come out, such as the fart that blows you across the river, things like that, real gems. Thank you so much for sharing, Matt. But more on a serious note, lots of great stories, lots of Dharma gems in there as well. But importantly, great reminders about being mindful about how the 8 worldly winds do blow us from one way to another. So I'm now open up the session for any questions that people may have for Matt. So if you have a question, you're welcome to unmute yourself for those who are online, or you can also put it into the chat. If you have a question that you would like me to ask anonymously, then you could just send it to me directly. And then for those who are here, as usual, you're welcome to ask the questions, or you can write it onto the pieces of paper. Okay, so if you have any questions, feel free to ask.
I'm just going to first remove the spotlight from myself, so we can just feel like we're all sort of a bit more on conversational terms rather than at the pulpit.
Thank you. It's more for our video, actually, Matt. Sorry, it's just that, sorry, I put you on spotlight again, because some people may not want to be on video for the YouTube video, if that's okay. But if you want, you just change the view to gallery and then you'll be able to see everyone. Hope that's okay. Thank you. Okay. Okay, so questions or comments? So Matt, we have some thank yous. So thank you. It was a humorous and interesting Dharma talk. I agree with that. And also Sin Sin has said hello as well. Okay, any questions?
I suppose
we have a question here. Matt, just hope you can hear this. This is someone who's here in person.
Thank you very much for your talk. I've owned a few labs over lots. I love that little comment about the Labrador. They eat the chocolates. I know what labs are like. But on a serious note, it's all about just learning to actually the Dharma practice and the meditation is sort of like it's an ongoing thing 24/7 because there's so much. Like your day at work or your day at the beach or your day, just no matter what you do, your phone calls you receive and stuff like that, just shows you how fragile your life can be and how unpredictable, things that happen. I suppose your thing is like just that way of just taking that little, just to find that way of taking that little break when the negative things happen in life. How do you sort of deal with that?
Thanks for the question.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's a good point, and you're very much correct that it's like it's an ongoing thing. There's not, you don't get like a notification or a warning. In 10 minutes someone's going to criticize you for something. So brace yourself. It will just happen. I mean, certain circumstances, obviously, you can kind of see it coming, but it doesn't necessarily make it that much easier. So just, being aware of what's going on is, of course, one of the just very foundational skills that you need to have in that process. So whether or not we want to call it, meditation or mindfulness, but, just being aware of what's going on. And it's not, I think it's also not just what's going on within your own mind, but also what's going on within or around the world around you, because I hope from that little sort of the little technical diagram about mental process, it's really hard to just sort of separate out like, oh, well, this is your mind, and just be aware of those mental states. They're constantly being stimulated by the things that are happening outside as well, right? So when you're maybe on a silent retreat, you might be, facing a wall. It's, something like anechoic chamber where there's absolutely no sound, and you're floating in some like sensory deprivation tank. Well, you might be able to remove all these like sensory stimuli, but that's like really unrealistic. So, just being even aware of the things that are going on around you and noticing beforehand, well, this kind of circumstance might lead to this kind of situation. So by that, I mean, for example, yeah, so you gave an example like, receiving phone calls. So, maybe you're doing some contract for someone, and maybe, something has gone wrong, and you're going to be you're half expecting a phone call from your client to like chew you out. So you're knowing, well, that's probably going to happen. And maybe it's the case of, you do get a bit of warning, and just sort of mentally preparing yourself beforehand. Okay, if they chew me out, what am I going to do? First thing you can do is nothing. Let them talk, let them say what they want to say. You can try to shut them down or something, where you can get very apologetic about it or very defensive about it. Might not necessarily work. They've also got their pain that they're experiencing, and most people aren't going to be anywhere near as well behaved as what we might hope them to be. So whatever they're going to throw at you, sometimes, okay, let them do that. Then the trick is, of course, how to do that and let it sort of like wash over you. So, there it comes down to that, that sense of self again, being able to admit when we're wrong is a big one. So, if, say you're working on some contract with something and you've done something wrong, you've made a mess of the job, you're getting chewed out by the client, let them say their piece. If you've made a mistake, admit to that mistake, right? Be open about that. That will go a long way for a start. If you start to get defensive, that, well, it wasn't me, it was due to something else, or if you'd given me clear instructions in the first place, that's going to like escalate the situation. So that would be, one example there. Prepare yourself. It's not just sort of a matter of, ideally you could just sort of be like, well, I'm going to be in this really sharp meditative state. And every time they use some kind of phrase that references something specifically about me that my ego is going to latch onto and then respond with some kind of like pain, to which that pain I might then have this response of, say, aversion or anger. That's a really sharp edge of meditative awareness. Most of the time, that's a bit impractical. If you're like if you're, literally meditating for hours a day, you're in that environment, you kind of can do that. But you also do need some other sort of more practical skills as well, that I think will also go a long way too. So that's where I think the sort of the, being aware of this, the self-centered view is really important. And just trying to step out of that, try not to defend yourself too much. Try not to, at the same time, when you receive beneficial things, a lot of praise, don't get too carried away with that, if you say you receive praise, you can share that praise with, say, maybe other people. Maybe you're getting praise from a client, from a contract, you do share that praise with your workers and your staff, right? Don't take it all onto yourself, because the more you take onto yourself, it's going to start to become a bit precarious. I don't know, I've probably waffled on a bit there. The meditative state helps, but you also do need other practical skills as well, because a lot of these are interactions with other people.
Great, thanks so much, Matt. Another question, which is, sorry, just bring it up. What do the Mahayana or emptiness texts suggest in those kind of situations on a practical level?
Okay, I'm very glad you've got that last line there on a practical level. There are a number of texts that are kind of like on the high-end philosophical level, that will just sort of do a, well, just see all this is empty. When somebody, opens their mouth to scold you and say you're an idiot, okay, you are an idiot. So what does this you refer to? There's no object of that. Idiot, what are the characteristics of an idiot? You can't find something that can be substantially defined as an idiot. So what does the sentence even mean? Like nothing. It has absolutely no weight as it's coming out of their mouth. If you can do that, of course, then you're sort of like, you're home free. And again, for some people, and if you are on the sort of high end of your practice, then you might be able to do that. But if we're talking about for other levels, then I sort of go back to maybe some other positions. Let me think of something. So from Bodhisattva precepts, for example, one of the ideas in there is like self-aggrandizement is something that we want to avoid. So that's sort of making yourself out to be very special, making yourself out to be very important. I mean, these are all just very like ego, self-centered type of attitudes as well. The more you build them up, the more fragile they are. And then any words of criticism can be like very quickly like smash into that and cause all sorts of pains. So that's one example, you know, because you're talking specifically about Mahayana emptiness texts. So those kinds of texts do talk about sort of that high end of practice, but you probably don't need necessarily those texts for more practical ones. You also want to deal with some practical skills. So let me give you an example. Sometimes people refer to like a process instead of going from like a regular sort of afflicted state of mind and whatever, and then we're trying to realize the state of like emptiness or not self. But I think sometimes we might want to add another step in the process. And first of all, go from like a regular kind of selfish sort of state of mind to first constructing a healthy ego. First go from an unhealthy ego to building up and working on a healthy ego, and going from a healthy ego to a state of non-ego. So in this case, what I mean by healthy ego, you know, includes what we normally consider like positive emotions or virtues. So for example, you know, pride versus humility. So in that case, you want to work on like humility, for example. Now, if we want to be technical about it, humility is often still based on a sense of self. If I say something like, oh, you're much better at this than I am, and you're so good at cooking pancakes, and I make really bad pancakes, and can you show me how to cook pancakes? If you have that attitude towards people, you're not going to probably get into a fight with them about cooking pancakes, because you're not trying to claim that you're the world's best pancake maker, and of course your pancakes are really horrible. But by saying that I'm not good at pancakes, it's still this idea based on a self, right? It's still a self-centered view. So what can often happen if you start from like an unhealthy ego and you want to immediately go to a state of like egolessness, before you get to that state of egolessness, you're not doing anything about the unhealthy habits. And then there's this sort of danger of actually leaving your unhealthy habits in place and using ideas or teachings about emptiness as what they call spiritual bypassing. It's like an excuse not to do anything about something. Say, you've got a big ego or something, criticizing people all the time. And somebody says, why do you criticize people? Why are you being so negative? But there is no self. And because there is no self, therefore I can't be accused of being unvirtuous and being really critical of people. Big problem here. So maybe work to, instead of being critical of people all the time, to, praising people and saying kind words about people first. When that becomes a really well-developed and ingrained habit, then we can move on to talking about selflessness.
Wonderful. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
I'm conscious of the time. We've got 10 minutes left and we've got 3 questions. So the next question is, thank you for a wonderful presentation. Can you please speak to whether connecting with the pleasure within meditation can help us go deeper?
Yeah, it can. So again, this is another interesting example where, we might hear like, oh, if you get pleasure or happiness from meditation, some people go, oh, like, this is a bad thing because you'll immediately become attached to meditation. And I have actually heard people say that, like, oh, you shouldn't meditate because it might make you too blissful, and then you get attached to it. Like, really problematic. It's a stepping stone along the way. And the Buddha himself, as far as we understand what the Buddha taught, did say you can use this. He talks about these wedges that you use to cut down a tree. Never mind the metaphor, but you use the happiness or the pleasure or the bliss or sukha or whatever term you want to use of a higher state to let go of the lower state. So when we're very attached to material things and we're very engrossed in just sensual pleasure, we can reflect that the happiness that comes from this very calm state of meditation is better than the pleasures you get from material objects. Okay, so you forsake this lower level and then you progress here. But you don't stop there. You sort of, and then that gets refined. And then there's an even deeper, higher state of meditation, which is even more blissful than this. So you drop this lower level and progress and progress. But, say, well, you're just becoming attached to something else. Well, you are, but you're becoming more and more attached to a refiner thing. And at the end, you still need to reflect that that state is impermanent, dissatisfactory, conditioned, subject to change, etc., etc. So don't be attached to that either. So you've got to let go of the coarse things first, and you can use attachment to more refined things to let go of those, right? You can use, weird example, use methadone to get off heroin, and then I don't know what, drink a lot of coffee to get off methadone or something. I don't know how that works, but it's better to be using the methadone than the heroin. So don't worry about that as a form of attachment.
Thanks, Matt. Next one. Thank you, Matt, for the talk and explanation. Listening to your talk tonight, I am reminded of the concept of yin and yang. If so, what are your thoughts? Do you think there is a lesson here as well, i.e. that ups and downs, good and bad, must coexist like the 8 worldly winds?
Yeah, there is a bit of, a bit kind of yin-yang in there, in the sense that you're talking about these like complementary, like opposites to each other. Now, I'm no expert on yin-yang kind of philosophy here, but the little that I do understand is that it is supposed to be a balance between them. But it's easy to mistake that, and easier to think, well, what does that mean? So like sometimes I should get praise and sometimes I should get blame, and I should just kind of maintain like today I got yelled at and yesterday somebody said I did a good job, so I've got like a good balance and this is what I'm aiming at. These people love me and those people hate me, so I'm right on the mark. No, not quite. This is a little bit like, so in Buddhism, we often talk about the middle way. And often people will say the middle way is between pleasure and pain. And I think that phrase is actually very misleading, because it makes people think that you either want sometimes to be in pleasure and sometimes in pain, and that's like a balance. That's not what it means. Or if you're experiencing pleasure, that's a bad thing. It's not. The middle way is actually between grasping or seeking pleasure and grasping or seeking pain. It's not the pleasure and pain themselves. These things are going to come. And you don't have to, it's not about trying to maintain some balance of the two. It's keeping a state of mind that's unmoved by them. So in that regard, the Buddhist take is, I think, quite a bit different from the yin-yang philosophy. You don't have to maintain ups and downs. They're going to happen, just kind of leave them. When they come, the ups come and the downs come, just keep centered and don't get thrown up or dragged down by them.
Thank you. Final question. It's really hard to respond equanimously when someone has deliberately defamed you for their own benefit. So even after reflecting on the other person is suffering too. Any help, suggestions?
Yeah, it is. It is. And you've already given what would be the usual sort of first, maybe Dharma response to it is, there's this idea that like hurt people, people who are hurt and in pain will go out and hurt other people too, right? So hurt people. The first one's an adjective and the second one's a verb. Sorry, too technical. So this is a very good reflection that when people do act aggressively or do things like this, it's because they're suffering. They've got a fragile ego and maybe they feel they need to defame you in order to make themselves look good. And that shows a really, deep kind of insecurity. And that is still a good contemplation, because it's more likely to make us to not get angry with them, which isn't good for us, and more likely to have a bit of compassion with them. But at the same time, when you're defamed like that, you might miss out on, you get fired from your job, or, people could be abusive towards you, and you're like, but what? Like, it's based on a lie. So in that case, I mean, another reflection might be to sort of say, well, there's a cause and there's a reason for everything. So, you know, you don't want to just throw everything back to, oh, in a past life, I did the same to them. Well, yeah, maybe, you don't know. It might help you to kind of deal with it. But I still just get back to this idea of, you know, when you're defamed, why does it hurt? You know, and you'll find in there somewhere, there's still this, like, there's a sense of self in there somewhere. And that might be quite a bitter pill to swallow, because we all do have those kinds of craving. You know, we all want to be loved by other people. And then when other people spread bad stories about us and then they hate us for things that are not true, we suffer as a result. But we can also reflect, well, yeah, why do I feel I need these things? Not easy though. And you can also respond kind of in the positive way. The idea that like causes like. Well, we can think, well, if we're being defamed, one, we must definitely refrain from defaming others. And on the flip side, we should also create the positive, you know, praise others, present others in the best light possible. And hopefully by creating that positive karma for ourselves, it's going to come back to us at some point. Like, can't guarantee when, but at some point. Yeah, it's a good comment from Zen there. The higher you put yourself on a pedestal, the harder you will fall, unfortunately. Yeah, that's an important point. Though we have to also be careful that this might lead to a kind of like a low self-esteem. Sometimes people confuse like low self-esteem with like no self-esteem with no self-esteem. So we might have this idea that, like, you know, you sometimes see this in somebody. The Chan tradition has this, and some Tibetan traditions have it. This kind of game of making yourself out to look very lowly. There's this whole like long Chan dialogue, and these two Chan masters like having a competition who can be most lonely. One of them ends up like saying like, I'm a maggot in a pile of donkey poop or something, like that's how low I am. And it's kind of like very exaggerated. But if you kind of put yourself like, oh, I'm so low and I'm very unimportant and I'm worthless, for example, that's not the same as not having a sense of self. And that doesn't lead to happiness. You know, people that have this incredibly low self-esteem, low self-security, that's not liberation. That's actually a very kind of painful experience. That's what I'm talking about in like that unhealthy ego. So you have to kind of like, it's not being off the pedestal. It's not having a self and not having a pedestal would be the goal, rather than just putting yourself at the bottom of the pedestal, perhaps. I think
Great, thank you so much, Matt. And we've got. Oh, sorry, you were saying?
Oh, I thought I saw Venerable raise his hand there or something.
Yeah, Venerable Dhammika.
Yes. Am I on, am I?
Yes, we can hear you, Venerable.
What you just said last reminded me of that wonderful saying by La Rochefoucauld, who said, pride has 1,000 ways of disguising itself, but never is it more carefully hidden. Never is it more easily able to take people in as when it is masquerading as humility.
Well said. Well said, sir.
Thank you, Venerable, for the contribution. And thank you so much, Matt, again. What a great talk. And thank you for your patience and with sharing your wisdom in answering our questions as well. I'm now going to hand over back to our lovely MC, Elise, for her to end the session.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matt, for such an engaging and insightful talk. And you are such a good storyteller. praise, and great Chinese speaker as well. And before we end the session, so on behalf of Metta Center, I'd like to invite you to give a dedication of merits or closing prayer.
Hey, dedication. I'm just going to do a very off the cuff one, if I may. So just sit comfortably, however you will. If you wish to join palms or whatever floats your boat, that's all fine. May the merit we have generated today by teaching the Dharma and listening to the Dharma, the merit from contemplating the Dharma, discussing the Dharma, may that merit be dedicated to the well-being of ourselves, our families, our friends, our community, and all sentient beings. May we, our families, friends, community, and all sentient beings, by this merit, attain happiness in this life, attain happiness in future lives, and ultimately attain the happiness of liberation, that is nirvana. Sadhu, sadhu.
Yes, I do.